Okay, so we should have all three triggers now. So let me just do a quick refresh here. Refresh, there we go. And so now we have all three triggers for insert, update, and delete. Okay, so we should be able to maintain the section current enrollment as we make changes, and away we go. So how can I do that? Well, I mean, the insert and the delete kind of pair nicely. You know, in the real world, you're often not going to run your tests against the actual production database, right? You'll have a mock-up of it or something like that that you utilize. But for now, I can actually just mess around in the database. Since I'm doing so, though, whenever I can, I'll try to put the data back again the way it was before I ran my test. So I'm going to open a new query window, right? And I'm going to start by getting a few variables in place for my actual test script. Okay. Now don't be scared when I copy and paste this in. I'll talk about each of these. Okay. So I need two different use case variables, right? A section ID and a student ID. Because I want to play with these values and maybe change one or the other or both. Besides, because it's a composite primary key, even to identify one record, I need to have both values. So those two variables are just to support my use case, right? The section ID and the student ID. So I'm going to make a variable to have the initial value, because really what we're looking for are changes in that enrollment figure in our section table, right? So I'll grab the initial enrollment before I begin. I'm going to tuck that in a variable just for comparison as I go through my test process. Then I'm going to check the temperature of the water, so to speak, or what the current value of my enrollment is after I do an insert into the enrollment table. Right? So I'll add a student or enroll a student into a section, and then I'll check how is it changed. How is the actual enrollment figure changed? Then what I'll do is after the delete, I'll check it again. So all three of these variables will just be for section current enrollment, just in the 3 points in time. Before I've attached the data, after I've inserted, okay, how did it change? After I've deleted, it should actually, in theory, go back to the beginning, right? So the after delete value should match my initial value. Okay. So this is just setting up my use case, right? Section ID 2, I'm going to insert student ID 1. I did some preparation ahead of time. I checked the tables because, of course, you cannot violate a primary key, so I can't enroll the same student in the same section twice. Right? So I had to make sure that I was okay. And at this point in time, section 2 does not have section 1 or student 1 enrolled, so I should be allowed to insert this record. Okay. So that's good. So the next thing I probably want to do is get that initial value. What is the section current enrollment before I change anything? Okay. By the way, I'm going to post this script when I'm done. So you can type and follow along if you want, but I'll post it as soon as we're finished. Okay. So to get the initial value, I just do a select from, of course, my section table. That's where the denormalized data lives. And I'm just storing it into my initial, okay, the initial enrollment figure, right? For the one section that I've set in here, my use case. Okay, so that's the first step. All right, now I'm ready to actually insert the record. So I can do that here. I'll insert an enrollment record. Maybe I'll make my font a little bigger. So just insert into the university enrollment. Okay, I can leave out the grade. It allows null anyway. I'm not even going to worry about it for this little test, right? I have to supply the value for the student ID and the section ID. Well, I stored those in my two variables for my use case. So now I will have added student 2 into section 1, or vice versa, whichever, I can't remember it is. So student 1 into section 2. Okay, as long as that works, then it should automatically trigger, right, my update to the section current enrollment. So basically, I just want to run this exact same select over again down here. But this time I'll store it in the next variable. So this is the after insert. Okay, the value after doing the insert, it should of course gone up by 1, right? Because I inserted one enrollment record. I added a student to the section. So hopefully this is one bigger than the last value. Okay. Now I can, at the same time, I'm following the principle of, if possible, put the data back the way it was. I will delete the record that I inserted. Okay, so the data hasn't actually changed by the time I'm done. And at the same time, though, my trigger for the delete action should modify the section current enrollment accordingly. Okay, so my delete is pretty straightforward as well. Delete the record. Just delete from university enrollment where the primary key matches the composite primary key. Okay, well, let's test the water again. Let's find out, after doing the delete, what the current value stored in section current enrollment is. So you notice that this select statement has been repeated 3 times now, right? Just assigning the value into 3 different variables. So I've stored it before I started, after the insert, after the delete, which should match the initial value. Okay, so that makes a fairly good test for both the insert and the delete, right? So really I just need to show the results. Now I could do a nice big long print command, but I'm lazy today, so I'll just show it with a simple select. Okay, I will be good enough to put some comment, some aliases, right? So I'll just select the 3 values and away we go. So I think I should be good. I should be able to execute this, and there we go. So what we see is the initial enrollment in this section was 19. After we did the insert, boom, it jumped up to 20. After we did the delete, the final value was back down to the original 19. Looks good. So we've tested both our insert and delete triggers. There's more than one way to write a test like this, but this was the first that occurred to me. And anything that, you know, really does show that it actually does update the value on an insert and updates it again on a delete works out for me. Any questions about that? Okay, so finally, I'm going to do a separate window altogether because the update is different, right? It involves multiple sections and so on. Doing it in the same test script, you know, just doesn't work very well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start a new test script for the update. What I'll do is I'm going to move a student from one section to another. So again, I did a little homework first to be ready. For the update test, I'm going to move student ID 2 from section 1 to section 2. Remember, the data is already put back the way it was initially, right? So, so I have some small ints here because that's all you need to store this value. Okay, the before and after values for both the old section and the new section. That way I can really see that they did change appropriately across this transition, right? Now, of course, I also need to keep track of what the old and new sections are, that I'm transferring the student out of the old section into the new, right? And I need a variable to keep track of what student I'm using as a test case. So that's why all these variables are there. Before and after values for the enrollment figure for the 2 sections, and then the actual section IDs involved, and then the 1 student that I'm transferring around. Looks like a lot of variables, but there's really nothing there we don't need. Then I'll pick the values for the testing. So I checked out old section 1, new section 21. I can transfer student 3. Okay, they're currently in section 1, and there's room for them in section 21. I should be allowed to put them there. Okay, so that's a reasonable use case that I should be able to carry out. Okay. So that's why this one's a little different, because we have the 2 sections involved. That's why for this one I'm going to write a separate test script. All right. So once again, I'll do this in stages. I'll show the original values. Okay. So I'll get the, now I'm just going to show them up on the screen this time. Right. So where the section ID is in this list. Okay. So I want to show this information for both the original and the new sections. Okay, so I'll just select from section for these 2 sections, the old one and the new one. Then I'll actually insert the enrollment record. okay, to use for testing. So I'll make a new record and I'll move them around, right? Now for the original values, okay, I'll get the before, okay, the old section, and then the after. Sorry, before the old and the new section. So I'll find out how many students are enrolled in those two sections before I make the change to transfer the student, right? I already know that this insert will have modified the one value, right? Because that trigger has already been tested and works. Okay. So then I'll get the old values before I do the transfer. The transfer is an update command, so I'll do that next. As you can see, often these test scripts are much bigger than the procedures we write initially, right? Okay, so do the update, move the student from the old section to the new one, right? So that's an update to the enrollment table, setting the section ID to the new one, where it was in the old one, and the student is the matching student that we're working with. So that's the basic update. Now we need to get those two values, okay, the enrollments in those two sections after making the transfer. Oh, I meant to grab my comment too, so I'll just throw that in here. So the after values, right? Again, section current enrollment for each of the old and the new sections, stored into those two variables. So now I've got just about all the values that I need. Because I like to put the data back again, I inserted a new student to play with, so I didn't actually mess with a student that was already in the system. So I'll clean up by removing that test record, right? That's maybe overkill. I could have just taken an existing student and moved them as long as I put them back. But this way I'm just taking that enrollment record out altogether and done. So then to show the results and the final values that everything is back again, I can do that in two steps. This select will just show me the before and after values for the two sections, right? So I can see how they changed. And then this will let me see that I actually put all the data back the way it originally was. I'll execute. And what do we see here? Let me make a bit more room so we can see it all at once. Right? So this was my query, just pulling up the two sections I'm working with. So before, I had 25 students here, none there. Okay, this lets me see it's back the way it was, but this shows the change. So the old section before had 26. Well, that's because I inserted a new student, right? It was 25 before I did anything, but after I inserted the student, it went to 26 and 0. Then I did the transfer, so it went down to 25 and up to 1. So it successfully modified, transferring the student out of the old section into the new, went from 26 and 0 to 25 and 1. Decreased the old section count and added 1 to the new section count. And this is just here to reassure me that I put all the data back the way it was before I started. I haven't messed anything up in the actual system. Seems like a lot of work to do that test and just see this, but you have to test these things. You can't just assume they work right. In fact, I'll be honest, with my first section earlier today, when I created my first insert trigger, I went to test it and it didn't work. Kept on getting an error about that I was violating a check constraint. So those from that section that are watching this, the reason why is I forgot the where clause. So my update was adding 1. Actually, it was the inserted, right? So anyway, same idea. It was adding 1 to every section instead of just doing it to the one section. And there were some that were full. There's a check constraint because there's a maximum enrollment. So if they were full already, right, without a where clause, it tried to update every record. Bad me. Okay, I'm being honest and accepting my mistake. I messed that demo. I had 2 minutes left in the period, and I was trying to do the whole thing at once. So anyway, that was the reason why. All right, so there we go. I will post this actual script up for you to have a copy of, so you didn't have to try and type all that as I was doing it. But that's a good example of how we can use a trigger to maintain denormalized data. Fairly simple one, although the transfer was a little complicated because you had to worry about the old and the new sections. Any questions before I stop recording? So you can get your voice up on YouTube? No? No questions? Alrighty.